Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Soul Food for Thought. I'm your host, Caleb Clark Souls, and today we have the Reverend Dr. Jamie Clark Souls. You want to go ahead, introduce yourself?
Yes, I am the Reverend Dr. Jamie Clark Souls. I am ordained in the American Baptist Churches USA. I teach New Testament at Perkins School of Theology at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas.
Any projects that you're working on right now, or anything that you're working on that you want to tell us about?
So I am working on a number of different things. One trajectory of my research has to do with women in the Bible. So I have a book that is due in August. It will be coming out next year. I also work in the area of disability studies, and I'm very excited because next month I'm going to go spend a week at Houston Methodist Hospital studying bioethics there.
Is it like a convention, or what is it?
Well, it's a class for physicians and other healthcare workers, really, and a team or a group of ethicists who help people make very difficult decisions while in the hospital, from organ donation to use of technology to extend life. All kinds of kind of complicated issues. They're just getting a little more complicated the more technology we have available.
And you said that's where again?
That's at Houston Methodist Hospital.
Okay, is it a class you're auditing, or?
It's actually a class for credit for the healthcare workers. I'm doing it because I teach a class at Perkins School of Theology that's honestly really popular, called Evil, Suffering, Death, and Afterlife in the New Testament. And it's popular not because of me. It's popular because my students are first of all, just human beings. And second of all, they're people training for various kinds of ministry. And they know that that question, all those questions, right? Evil, suffering, death, those are big questions for all human beings across all time. So, so it's an important class.
You have not like an outline, but like a general kind of synopsis you give of the class? People ask you about it?
That's a good question. It also depends on the context I teach it in. So when I teach my seminary students, it's really aimed at being a companion, particularly a spiritual companion, to those who are walking through various types of suffering or even death.
So like hospice care and
just being
just being a minister.
Yeah, minister. I mean, it's a big part of a minister's job, right? Is to show up during times of difficulty.
Is it through like the lens of Christianity, or is it you have multi-religious?
So right now, the class I teach, when I teach it, it's just through the lens of Christianity. Now, I have taught it in another context that is not what we call a confessional context, through another master's program at SMU. And even there, because I'm ordained and it's in a seminary, even there it can have that, the texts we read, for instance, are the New Testament. So that kind of, to some degree, gives it that lens. I have another colleague, but those people aren't training for ministry. So we have different conversations, and there are people of different faiths and people of no faith, because all human beings
have to
deal with all of these questions, and so it's just part of being human. I have a colleague at Perkins, Ruben Abito, who also addresses these subjects from a Buddhist viewpoint, and then my colleague Roy Heller has another class on this from the Hebrew Bible, perspective of the Hebrew Bible.
Okay.
And in fact, can I just say that on Tuesday, April 18th, while I'm down in Houston taking that class, Roy Heller, Dr. Heller, and I are going to teach a class for people ages 20s, 30s, I think just 20s and 30s, maybe some in their 40s. It's called Theology on Tap. It's going to be at a bar.
Oh, that's cool.
And so we're going to talk about heaven and hell.
The millennial.
So is that, I guess that's that generation. So it's for, so I think it's mostly.
Is it more like a down-to-earth kind of?
It is, so we're just going to talk. It's just a bunch of people who work during the day, and they're just interested in.
It's not like a credit for anything.
No. It's just you go to work and you come over and have a beer. Like, I think you pay $5 to come show up, and you get a free beer. And we're going to talk about heaven and hell. Dr. Heller does a little bit of talking, then I talk a little bit, and then there's going to be a panel, and there's going to be people who are across the spectrum on the panel, and then it'll just be question and answer for everybody. So expect like 250 people.
Which spectrum is that?
From the spectrum, I would say probably from quite conservative around issues of hell, all the way to fairly liberal.
Like fire and brimstone versus.
Yeah, versus probably universalism, universal salvation.
And so in these classes, like in your evil, suffering, and death, is it current events and kind of like intra-religion? I don't know if that's not really related, but like current events of, like, I don't know, people in Palestine and Israel. Is that like a thing that you would talk about, or?
Not so much in that class per se. I teach other classes that are, as you know, directly related to Palestine and Israel. To some degree, it's really spanning the philosophical questions. Okay. So there's the whole philosophical problem of what we call theodicy, which is the justice of God. So how can God be? Is God omnipotent, that is all powerful, but unwilling to stop suffering? So is God omnipotent but malevolent?
Yeah.
Or is God benevolent, right, willing what is good, but not able to do it, so impotent? Yeah. Right. So it's the classic kind of David Hume philosophical puzzle. So it really is around the issue of theodicy. Where is God in all of this? It also is I do a whole section on the history of the development of the idea of Satan. And hell, because if you read in the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, you don't get a robust hell or a robust Satan. But then even in the New Testament, all of a sudden, boom, you've got Beelzebub, all this kind of stuff. And you're like, where does it come from? And it turns out it comes from the period in between called the intertestamental period, which most people reading the New Testament have never heard of.
And is that just the time between when the Old Testament was written?
Yeah, there's a couple hundred years in between, and a lot's going on.
Not that much.
People were thinking, and there's all kinds of like mixing of cultures and sharing of ideas. So the Jews went into exile in Babylon. And they picked up influences from other cultures, dualism, angelology, demonology from Persian religions. Anyway, a lot of cultural intermixing. You know, Alexander the Great, of course, was quite famous for causing the mixing of a lot of cultures. So there's a sharing of ideas. So there's some borrowing, across religions, and so you get some very fascinating developments. So we study the history of that. But then the rest of the classes, to be honest, largely driven by, because it's an upper level class, it gets driven by the students' interests.
Okay.
So I had 2 Latina students last time do a whole project around the Day of the Dead.
Okay.
And those traditions, they actually had both grown up with those traditions, but not really studied them. There's it's kind of scary.
Origins.
There's skeletons, and it's kind of creepy, and what's going on.
So they kind of found the origins of that.
Yeah, and why is it important to people? And also, speaking of mixing of culture, so if they're here in America and they're Methodists or whatever, but they still, as Latinx folks, they still have their Methodist kind of thing, but then they still carry over, things from Latinx kinds of cultures. And so it was very interesting, and they found it fruitful, for their own. So it's largely driven. I have like one student who did a really, really amazing project on people coming home from war.
Okay. Kind of like cultures they pick up, or like the
people soul repair, and how there's special needs going on for veterans, suffering not just PTSD, but also dealing with all kinds of moral issues, and how you pick up and carry on your life after you've seen and done things that
unspeakable.
Yeah. And how you should come back to the culture. Everybody just expects you to pick up and just start living some normal life, and just go do your grocery shopping, go play with your kids, and there's no space to really, really address and deal with what just happened, not just psychologically, but spiritually, morally, how to put a person back together to reintegrate the self.
And even can you?
Right. So there is a cool thing over in Fort Worth called the Center for Soul Repair
Cool.
that is aimed at that.
It's just for people that went through traumatic stuff, or is it specifically for
It's
soldiers?
for soldiers, I believe.
Okay.
I shouldn't say that without double checking, but my impression is it's primarily aimed at helping soldiers. And so one of my students to this day has tried to start down in Houston. She's doing work around this to try to create spaces to, just to make space for that group of folks to work through stuff. Not just from a therapy perspective. I mean, that's because my students aren't trained in that.
A religious perspective.
Yeah, just from a soul perspective, you know, because that stuff is real, and if you haven't been through it, I think you have to go through it with people.
Someone.
I think everything is easier when it's handled together.
Yeah.
In community. All suffering, I would say. Is this too big of a statement? I don't know. But I'm just going to say, I think all suffering can be more readily and successfully carried and managed if it's done together.
In a community.
Yeah.
Sympathetic people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that something that you teach in the suffering and death class, or is there?
Yeah, the importance of community.
Conflicting philosophy on we should suffer by ourselves, or?
I don't think there's a philosophy of it, but I think we actually do that in real life. So there's a really the article "Why Did the Innocent Suffer?" I think is one of the first articles I have them read by David Tracy. And the thing is, sometimes the way we handle each other's suffering makes us feel alone. In other words, you can be in the room with somebody. So we study the book of Job. So Job's friends show up and he's in deep suffering and they're really unhelpful. So he's not actually alone physically. There's 3 people there, but he's way better off when they're not there.
Yeah. Because
they make him feel even way more alone when they're there than he felt before they showed up. And so I start the class out by saying, because I can't really write this on the syllabus for accreditation purposes. I have to write down what the goals of the class are, and that's fine. But what I say to the students in class is the actual goal of my class is to get people to stop saying stupid stuff about suffering. Yeah. And so that's the actual goal of the class.
Like an example
stop saying stupid stuff.
Oh, it's God's plan that, like when someone's
baby
dies,
is God's will, right? That
like
God kills babies, or heaven needed another angel, or he was more needed
somewhere else
there than here. People say all kinds of things. That people also overtly, like the Job story, they try to figure out, like, what did that person, what is it that you, if you're suffering,
what did you do?
What is it that you did that made this happen? Right, which is a problem.
God just took a gamble with Satan.
To us, it's a problem. Right. Well, with Job, that's an interesting biblical book. But yeah, we just do that. We want to find a reason someone else is suffering, because if we can find a reason, it gives order to the chaos. And we're like, oh, well, if you did that and that's why you're suffering,
like trial and error.
I just won't do that, and then I won't suffer.
Exactly.
And you add insult to injury by blaming them. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. I really like that article a lot because it also talks about a philosophical argument. People will say, well, suffering builds character.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Right?
Trials.
Which can be true. Yeah. Right? People say things like God never gives anyone more than they can handle. And that's not a helpful thing to say to folks. But anyway, the whole notion that suffering builds character. So the logical problem with that is, it is true, some suffering can build character, but some suffering just crushes and devastates and ruins a person. So all suffering is not the same. So we learned to really talk about in nuanced fashion, what kind of suffering is it? Is it voluntary suffering? Is it redemptive suffering? There's different kinds of suffering, and they're not of the same quality. But if you think about it, the thing like, well, suffering makes you a better person. Yeah. Well, the logical implication then is, you know what, as your friend, because I want you to have a good character,
I'm going to help you grow.
Yeah, I should actually try to cause more suffering so there could be more character building. And there's a phrase the author uses that I love. He says it's an issue of proportion, right? It's an issue of proportion.
Yeah.
So how much suffering is needed, whatever. He uses this phrase. He goes, you get into the business of being into, a cosmic nursery school.
Okay.
That everything is just supposed to be for your education. And it's not true. You can look around, like little kids being refugees from Syria drowning in the ocean.
Exactly.
Okay, this is not building character for anyone.
Or like the classic argument against that, or even the theodicy. Well, I think it's a part of the theodicy. Like a deer, like an innocent deer dying in a wildfire. Like, what is that suffering doing?
Right. What does that do for anyone? And also distinguishing
like natural evil.
Right. I was gonna say distinguishing exactly. See, look at you. You didn't even need my class. So the difference between moral evil, natural evil.
Is there moral evil?
What do you mean?
What is moral evil?
So when you talk about, like an avalanche, right? Natural evil, you would call it. I mean, the use of the word evil is
man-made.
I mean, even insurance companies call it an act of God, which I would take issue with an avalanche being an act of God. But on the other hand, by the way, there are things that happen in nature that are moral evil. That, like when people can't drink water in Flint, Michigan, that's because human beings did things.
So it's human,
When
made.
Yeah, there are things that look natural, but they're caused by us, right? When how we use our land, where we put our trash, who gets to live where, that kind of question. But moral evil, of course. Start talking about why is there evil in the world. That's where we start getting into Satan. Did the devil make you do it? Why do people make the choices they make?
Do you think
whose fault is it? Do you have free will or not?
Do you think
is it
people
all
are
determined?
Born evil?
Oh, that's a good question. Do I think people are born evil? I do not think people are born evil.
Okay, you think it's nature versus nurture, I guess. You think they're made that way?
I think people are born. I think you have to
try
to get a moral compass. So I believe you have to shape young human beings morally. And it's very important.
Yeah,
to be very clear about the moral structure you're trying to pass on to them. I don't buy into this thing of like, I'm just not going to direct my kid this way or that way. I'm just going to let them choose for themselves. Well, a little baby and a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old, they're kind of, I don't want to say a blank slate because obviously you're born with your genetic makeup, etc. But if you don't stop a child from hitting another child, or you have to make people share when they're little. I mean, I've raised 2 kids and you got to make people share. So I don't think people are born evil, but I think people are born selfish.
Yeah.
Right. So everything's about you. And it should be at the beginning.
Human nature, right?
Right. But as you grow up, you should be when you're getting morally formed, you should become more and more other oriented if you're developing well. Right? So, and that's where I think a lot of what you call evil comes in, because someone doesn't develop compassion, they don't develop a sense of the other, or that the other deserves the same happiness, the same safety, the same love. Right,
I think
that you do.
Even after you're formed as like mentally as a child, it's still a development, right? You're still developing to be more other oriented until you die, right?
I think so. What do you think?
I mean, if your growth doesn't stop mentally, at least. I mean, maybe actually physically, mentally, it stops at 25, but like spiritually and like as a person, your growth doesn't stop.
It shouldn't stop.
A lot of people does stop.
Right, but I think
if you're the same person as you were last year.
Yeah, I don't know, because it's hard to say because now I'm getting older, so we'll see. It's all kind of a big experiment. I'm curious to see if you get to a point, so you're just like, well, I know enough, I've learned enough.
Yeah.
This is what I've decided. This is how the world is, and so I'm now just going to go forward. I can't take any more change or development.
Yeah,
I hope not.
That's how. I mean, like stuff like baby boomers not understanding new tech or not understanding like the changes in the world. They just stop. And that's when you become, I'd say, that's when you become an old person.
Yeah.
When you stop progressing and you're just like, why isn't the world like it used to be?
Right. Right, right, and always finding that to be assuming that change is negative.
Yeah.
I think you have to be careful.
That's when your
about.
spirit becomes.
Now, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I might just decide. I might already have decided, like, I'm done learning any more technology. I don't know about that,
Well,
but I don't think.
but you're not mad that there is more technology.
I'm not mad there is technology. I'm just glad that there's people who know how to use it, and my job is to find out who they are and see how I can get them to do what I'm not good at.
Mm-hmm.
But I will worry about what I don't ever want to say is that I'm done. I've reached my limit growing spiritually or intellectually.
Yeah.
Right. So, even now I'm kind of taking up, I got the new app that a good friend, somebody I respect, he recommended to me, my Insight Timer app, and I'm trying to take up new methods of meditation, a whole new area. Yes, I'm a minister. Yes, I know prayer and I know Bible study and all of that, but it's been interesting to start learning from other traditions as well. Mm-hmm. Some of their spiritual practices.
How much, not to interrupt.
Yeah, no.
How much overlap do you see with that, like between Christian prayer and this app? I guess it's.
Well, yeah, the app's got.
Eastern-based.
Yeah, and the app also has Christian stuff on it. What's interesting to me is the things I pick aren't the Christian things.
Yeah.
And I think it's because I already know St. Patrick's Prayer. I don't need this app to, help me with that. But oh yeah, that's funny. Yeah, that's funny. It was yesterday was St. Patrick's Day. Yeah, and I think some of the ones I'm, looking at, just more Eastern traditions, like you said, on there. And some of them aren't identifying specifically, but I think something that overlaps, for instance, for all of them is contemplative, right? Embodied centering prayer or centering meditation, if you don't like the word prayer. I mean, it seems like all of the, at least, Judaism, Christianity, Eastern religions ask you to kind of be still, breathe,
introspect.
Yeah, introspect, but in a way that makes you turn back outward and not just
how you interact with other people.
Yeah, like you can introspect and then become completely self-absorbed, right? And very navel-gazy.
Yeah.
But true introspection should lead to, to a greater desire to connect. What do you think?
Socially, or
connect with others and make space for others, and I don't know, just increase compassion. I think I'll be working until I die on increasing compassion. I don't think it comes naturally.
In the world or in yourself?
Well, in myself, in order to increase it in the world.
Okay.
I don't know. What do you think? I think compassion is a hard one. I don't know. Do you think you're born? Do you think some people are more naturally compassionate? Do you think compassion is natural, learned, or both?
I think it depends on what age you are, I guess. I mean, I don't think kids are necessarily born with compassion, because you see them, they don't care when they punch another kid in the face. So I'd say it's learned, probably. Maybe some of it is innate, but probably most of it is learned.
Now, on the other hand, you see kids help each other.
Yeah, but usually more often don't you see them fight?
Like you said, it depends on what age and what's going on.
Yeah, how they were raised.
I don't know. I'm not an expert on kids. All I know is I just know the two I raised, so I don't know.
Has having kids or being a parent at least changed the way you went about your profession? Not in like a schedule way, but like in an outlook and how you teach?
Well, I think, again, that it teaches you some life lessons. I think you can learn those lessons in other ways.
Yeah.
I certainly don't think you have to have children to be any kind of developed spiritual being. But I think different kinds of relationships can teach you different kinds of things at different times in your life.
Okay.
So for sure, understanding that you can't control other people. I mean, there's lots of ways to learn that besides having kids, but it's a lesson we should all learn. So learn it however you need to learn it, but kids can help you I think do that. People won't always meet your expectations in the way you want them to, and that can turn out to actually be a better thing.
Yeah.
You know. So yeah, I think it certainly taught me things that I think I could have learned other ways, but I happened to learn them through having my children.
That's interesting.
Yeah, especially because your kids also don't know that you're the Reverend Doctor whatever.
It's a huge deal, yeah.
Right.
It's a humbling experience.
Yeah, you're just their parent. They're like, yeah. So anyway, here's what's going on with me. And it's good. Yeah, I think it's good. It gives you perspective. You know, to be reminded. It's just interesting because the kids are a way to practice really easily. I mean, it just very naturally. They're the thing that matters to you more than anything else as soon as they come along. You know, and so you're hopefully. So yeah, I mean, you're just willing to sacrifice for them, and they're endlessly fascinating, and yeah, they just add just a fantastic dimension. Again, I do not think people are incomplete when they don't have children. I want to clearly state that. But yeah.
How has being a woman in kind of ministry and a leadership position in the church and religion, how's that experience been? It's kind of a broad question, but
it is a broad question. It's a great question, and it's an ongoing question because things are definitely more of a challenge for women in ministry still within Christianity, even mainline Christianity, by which I mean Episcopalians, Presbyterians, Lutherans.
I'd say every religion is that way, though, right?
I don't know every religion well enough to speak, but yeah, you know, in all facets of life globally, women have not achieved equality, and it's very, very, very clear in ministry and also in seminaries, which of course train people for ministry,
and even academia, right?
Yeah, in academia, and especially if you get into the area, if you get into seminaries, into the area of religion, you know, there are seminaries who definitely would not, you know, hire women, at least to do very certain things. Seminaries where women can't teach men. So yeah, and we train lots of women for ministry, but then it's hard for them to actually get good appointments, make the same pay. So yeah, women struggle still to have equality, you know, in the church, and then certainly certain Christian churches are not helpful at all when it comes to seeing women made in the image of God in an equal fashion to males. So we have our work cut out for us. I'm here. I'm doing it. I got lots of students and alums who are out there, you know, changing the world and not letting it defeat them. But it's a problem. It truly is. You know, it truly is.
It's ongoing.
Or even you can even have just DS, as they call them in the Methodist Church, district superintendents and bishops who appoint women. They're like, look, we're going to be forward thinking. That's fine. But then when the woman shows up to minister in that congregation, if the congregation isn't very open to it, it just makes for a rough time for everybody. So you can force the issue, but it still doesn't mean you're going to change people's minds and hearts, you know, overnight. So there's a lot of, you know, of course, to me, religion has so many beautiful gifts, and there's so much genius to the Christian tradition, which is the one I know the best. But there are ongoing problems caused, very entrenched sexist problems in the tradition.
I wouldn't say that's even the fault of Christianity, just the people that practice it, right?
Yeah, they were all responsible for how we practice our traditions, especially today. Because you can say, well, okay, fine, well, I'm taking this from the first century, they did this. Okay, well, you're in the 21st century.
Yeah.
So
things are different.
Right. You're very happy to kind of make adjustments in certain areas. You don't go around wearing a toga and trotting around on a horse. So it's interesting how people decide what to keep and pull from the first century and dump right into the 21st century, and which things people are willing to say, oh, well, we live in a different time, a different place. So yes, we do. Doesn't mean we chuck everything from our tradition. There's so much in our tradition that is life-giving. but some adjustments.
You gotta
how
find a
you
way to
how you
balance
go
it.
about. I mean, Scripture is my area. So fine, of course, Scripture is authoritative for Christians. You should read Scripture. It should mold your morality. It should be what you talk about. It should be what you preach from on a Sunday morning. You shouldn't be just preaching from a comic book. Not to say you can't use a comic book, but you should. That's our holy text. But there are lots of different ways to go about interpreting Scripture, and some are more life-giving than others, and some really take the text and turn it upside down on its head and make it say the opposite of what it was originally trying to say. And this is where I come in. I just have to say, no, this is not what we're doing. This is not happening on my watch. And here are some skills. So, yeah, I love what I do.
As a graduate PhD receiver from an Ivy League school, can you give me like an inside look into what it's like to actually be an Ivy League student?
You spent a lot of time in a library. A lot of time in a library. It was, I would say, my time at Yale was an incredibly exhilarating period of my life.
How long were you there?
10 years. So I was there. So I got my undergraduate at Stetson University and graduated in 1989. And I worked for a year as a youth minister at Central Baptist Church in Daytona Beach, Florida. And then in the fall of 90, I went to Yale Divinity School and got a Master's of Divinity degree in 1993. And then from 93 to 2000, I did my PhD in the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, which is a different section of Yale. And yeah, it was fantastic to be in the doctoral programs, incredibly small program and very rigorous. So what I would say is that it pulled out of me every last ounce of my potential. There was no resting on my laurels ever for 1 second for 7 straight years. So it was really exciting. I got to read a lot. I got to dig into stuff that I would never have that kind of time to do otherwise, and just really become expert at something. Now, I was expert at a pretty small amount of stuff given the world's knowledge, but wow, just really a once in a lifetime. And not to mention, so the colleagues you have are first rate. Again, they don't rest on their laurels, so you better bring it. The resources you have at your hands as Yale University, rare books, and just between the faculty and it's an amazing resource. Plus, you're pretty close to New York, so you just have so many vast opportunities. Yeah, it's a good way to put it. And it was this mentally so. I mean, it was really challenging, but also just exciting and stimulating and provocative and wow, yeah, just academics on steroids. So yeah.
You recently went to Israel / Palestine, correct? And the dialogue being had there is very interesting. Is there stuff you want to share about that trip?
Yeah, so I take students there not every, but most Januaries. I take folks, and it's a cultural immersion. It's part of what we do, our cultural immersion program. So part of it's to go out of your own culture and learn another culture. And you can do it in a lot of places. We have lots of different ones, but I take students to Palestine and to Israel. So most Christians who go over just go over to view the land, the Holy Land, as the place where Jesus walked, where the early apostles walked, and they go to the archaeological or ancient sites. Jesus did this, Jesus did that. Of course we do that. It's wonderful, beautiful, holy, meaningful, etc. But I call these trips, I explain it to people as, look, we're going to go there and we're going to study dead stones and living stones. The dead stones are, let's go everywhere Jesus walked. It's wonderful, it's deeply meaningful and important. But what we don't want to do is play Christian Disneyland. Where you just go there like you think it's some big, either a resort or like a big one giant museum. Because there's actually living people there.
With a lot of problems. It's
a country that's highly conflicted. I mean, so a lot of people. So some of my students, to be honest, and like most Americans, I would say, first of all, they just mostly don't know the situation, because we all have a lot to know. There's a lot going on in the globe, but
especially in America.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So there's that issue. First of all, people either don't know about what's really going on there, or if they do know, they're kind of knee-jerk pro-Israeli.
Mm-hmm.
We're pro-Israel as a nation, because I'm pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian, because I'm pro-human being.
Yeah.
But Americans, because of our relationship with Israel, automatically default to anything Israel's doing is just fine, and the Palestinians must all just be terrorists.
Exactly.
And so what my students learn by going over there, we travel and live in the West Bank.
Okay.
For the first 10 days.
People who don't know what that is.
Yeah, so the West Bank, so you have Israel, and then you have the West Bank and Gaza are where Palestinians live. So that would be called Palestine by Palestinians. Israel doesn't recognize it as a country, so it's kind of it's just where the Palestinians are. It's kind of
you don't have a name for it.
Well, the West Bank, yeah, there's areas A, B, and C, which gets very complicated. You can Google it, look it up. There's areas A, B, and C, and all that boils down to where Jews, Israeli Jews can be, and where Palestinian Arabs can be, and then there's also Israeli Arabs. And so these different zones are related to who can be where when. So, for instance, when we go over there, my students and I, we live in Bethlehem. Okay. We home base out of Bethlehem for the first week that we're there, and then we spend time in the Galilee. And then we also go over and spend time in Jerusalem. So what's interesting, so we hang out with Palestinians in Bethlehem. We learn about their life there. They consider it an open-air prison. This is what all the Palestinians living in Bethlehem will tell you, Bethlehem being where the Church of the Nativity is, where Jesus was born. Kind of interesting. There's hardly any Christians left in the Holy Land.
That is interesting.
Yeah, and so most of the Christians who are native there are Palestinians.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's a very, but what's weird is, so we were just there. We're in Bethlehem, kicking around. We go out, we do whatever we want, tool around the town, meet the people. Our guides are all Palestinians, so we become good friends with them, meet their families, etc. Then we go over and spend time in Jerusalem and hear about life there as Israelis and what their life is like. And what you find out, the way one person puts it, who always speaks to my group, says everyone in that country is suffering from PTSD.
In Israel or Palestine?
In the whole Holy Land, what we call the Holy Land. And our guide, who's Palestinian, always says we call it Holy Land. He's like, I don't want to call it Israel, because if you're pro-Palestinian, you're like, that's gonna kind of trigger you.
Yeah.
I don't want to call it Palestine, because if you're pro-Israel, you're gonna. So whatever. He's like, we're just gonna call it Holy Land. But what's weird? So we are just American Christians, most of whom don't even know what's going on at all. Yet we have the right to go right into Bethlehem, really no questions asked, do whatever we want, tool around, no issues whatsoever, anywhere in the West Bank. We were in Samaria. Yeah. We were all over the West Bank. No questions asked, do whatever we want, move freely. Then we just, pop over to Jerusalem. We can go back and forth. What's weird is like the Palestinians can't cross over.
There's checkpoints.
Right. They can't get through the checkpoints like I can. They have to wait all day long, etc. So they can't move freely in Israel. And for the most part, normal Israeli citizens can't just go like the Church of the Nativity, for instance, is being restored, and it's beautiful and it's wonderful and it's amazing what's happening there. And so when I was over on the Israeli side in Jerusalem, I was having coffee with a rabbi there, and I was like, oh my gosh, Church of the Nativity, he hasn't been there since 1967 to Bethlehem.
The rabbi.
Yeah, and I realized he can't just go over to Bethlehem and look at the Church of Nativity. So what's weird is you have people who've been living in this land for quite a while, who have a deep attachment to this land, whether they're Israeli or Palestinian, and there's places in the country neither one of them can go. Yet here we come blasting in as American Christians, half of us not even knowing anything about what's going on, to be honest.
Yeah.
But we, of all people, are free to go anywhere and everywhere we want, no questions asked. It's a really odd situation, and so I'm very educated. I'm very, very passionate about this, because we are all global citizens now.
Yeah.
And if you're not a global citizen, please wake up and become one.
You have access to
if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
Yeah.
And so being aware, I understand there's too much to know. You can't know everything in the world, but we can try to understand what world we're living in, and how our choices, what we choose to do or not do, does have wider implications, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
It does. Well, it's true. And so the other thing it does for my students, right? Sometimes getting out of your own culture. I don't care. Go to anybody else's culture. It doesn't have to be Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Yeah.
go anywhere. Well, maybe not to like
Not anywhere. Don't get beheaded.
Cancun. Well, sure. I'm saying you're not going to get the experience. I'm sorry, if you go to Cancun,
Go to a resort.
Right? Okay, fine. You're in another country. You're not really. So unless you're paying attention to certain things, but I mean, really, go to another culture and hang out there, and really, again, look at the living stones and who's really living there right now. And what you'll start to see. So one thing my students start to see is like, wow, okay, so there's unequal treatment in this country, in the Holy Land, if you will. There's unequal. So Israel is trying to be a Jewish democratic state. Okay, well, not all of its citizens are treated equally. And so my students get really up in arms like that. They're like, how come people, with brown skin here aren't treated the same as people with white skin here or whatever? And, they start kind of, can start having strong opinions like, why are the Palestinians treated this way, whatever. And one thing it starts to help people realize, like, because they'll say, like, it doesn't look like your country. I mean, is your country really perfected?
Yeah.
Equal treatment of all people.
Yeah.
Right? And what's interesting is, like, the African American students start to notice, like, wow, a lot of the Palestinian artists or musicians draw upon American hip hop music.
Yeah.
So the students will be sitting there like, wait, this is quoting this American artist, like, right. They start to see because Palestinians
resonate with that.
Right.
With the experience
of African Americans. And what happens is African American students tend to resonate with the Palestinian experience. So then it's interesting to watch, like, where is it similar? But then you also have to be careful not to say they're the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Right? You still now you can't just assume everything about how Palestinians feel.
Yeah, because it's different.
Because you're the oppressed one in your own country. So there are similarities in a way that there's not for white students, right? Because they're not oppressed in America. So yeah, it's endlessly fascinating. You have big conversations about history, right? Like, how is history? What is history? Who tells it?
Yeah, it's
who gets
wins,
to tell
right?
it?
The winner tells history, right?
And who gets to tell the story to whom? Anything about textbooks in your school?
Yeah.
I mean, who gets to make up those textbooks? And
it's not like a huge consensus about this is what happened. I mean, everything's through a biased lens, no matter how you look at it.
And even, like, this is interesting when they start telling history. So we do this one thing where we take them to one city called Jaffa, ancient Jaffa, and you hear the history of the city told by an Israeli Jew and a Palestinian Arab. Same city, same number, same across the same years, very different narrative.
Yeah.
It's also interesting, and then afterwards we talk about how history is told, and even small things about periodization, like the such and such period. Well, who gets to just take a chunk of time and name it as a meaningful period? Meaningful to whom and why?
Yeah, exactly.
What marks those dates? So the thing that that the formation of the Jewish state, they call, for the Palestinians, that's called the Nakba, which means the catastrophe.
That's the Palestinians.
That's what they call it. It's the Nakba, right? Exactly. With the homecoming for the Jews, like they're huge. Their biggest, like, most liberative, shining moment of, like, we have a country for the first time since the 2nd century BCE. We have a country. Look, all the promises have come true, etc. Like the victory of the one people, they literally call the Nakba. Right?
Yeah, it's just opposing sides.
It's catastrophe. And so really, it makes you then ask questions about history in general. Whatever, no matter what country you're in, how does history work?
It'd be so interesting to get, like, if aliens came and did a history of the Earth. It'd be so interesting to see, like, an objective viewpoint. They don't care what happens on Earth. It'd be very interesting to see how it's just objectively told.
Yeah.
No bias or narrative at all.
Yeah, of course, then you'd have to ask, wouldn't the aliens have some bias, though?
I don't know any aliens.
They would have to.
Why is that?
Because they'd have to have assumptions, right? Wouldn't they? I don't know.
They're aliens.
Yeah,
I'm just saying.
We'd have to know more about it. But I see what you're saying. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I guess.
Just as a device to say an objective view of history.
Right.
what would that look like?
Mm-hmm.
Probably would change a lot of things.
Yeah, I guess I just don't. I mean, I'm wondering what an objective view of history would even mean.
Just taking into account events that happened.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be very long read.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, because there's no such thing as uninterpreted facts.
Okay, so you're saying
right?
if no one interprets it, it doesn't exist. Like if a tree falls in the woods and no one hears it, does it make a noise?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does make a noise just because of physics. If a tree falls,
But
it makes noise. But
yeah,
exactly. That's what I wonder.
Figuratively.
That's what I wonder. Because, like, again, when we read the Bible, I mean, if anybody tells you they're giving you an objective reading of the Bible, run away.
Run away. Yeah.
Either they're disingenuous.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Either they're really, really unself-aware, or they're deceitful, and either way, it's not a good thing.
Yeah.
So if somebody honestly does not believe that their own social location
that plays a factor in,
if they think it doesn't, that's quite unaware. It does. No one comes to a text of any kind. I don't care if it's scriptural or a news report.
Mm-hmm.
No one comes without. I'm not saying I'm not a relativist as in, oh, well, then don't bother trying. Yeah. Nothing can be, because there are bad interpretations. There are irrational. There are better and worse interpretations. But if you're going to tell me there's only one interpretation of something, no.
Because who interpreted that?
Right. That's totalitarianism.
Uh-huh.
That's tyranny. The notion of one capital A, capital T, no human being owns one absolute truth, like access to the absolute truth. Yeah. That is the path of tyranny, and that is the path of genocide. And it sounds like a logical leap, but it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, and that's what postmodernism tells us,
you can
right?
Look again at history, might be biased, but you can look and see that once you start going down that path, it leads to what you said, genocide and tyranny. Yeah, because you just like this is it, and then you get inside or outside. Everything's a dichotomy. Yeah. It's an either or, right? Instead of the both and. I mean, if postmodernism has taught us anything, it's that both and, not either or. Mm-hmm.
And be very nervous about. I mean, the modernist project has failed. I mean, the notion in modernism, if we just educate people, science will save us, education will save us. It hasn't saved us. All it's done is given us more efficient ways to kill each other. So, I mean, that project has failed.
And kill ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, like, not even efficient, but in a way that's like, it's given us the opportunity to eat all this terrible things.
Mm.
And pop all these pills in our bodies, all this science has. And it's...
Yeah, science isn't bad.
It's not bad, but
science isn't good.
It's not God.
Right. I mean, all these things are
you
tools.
Need balance.
Yeah.
Between.
And we need more real conversation.
Dialogue.
Nuanced conversation. I mean, that's part of why I want to go take this thing at Houston Methodist, this class on bioethics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, first of all, no one's talking about dying, which I find ironic because
so weird. Everyone does it.
Everyone does it, and also just the movies. I've gone and seen Black Panther recently. Just saw Annihilation. Anything you watch on TV, movie theater, we're surrounded by violence, from video games to even sitcoms.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
cartoons.
Watching
everything.
Archer, right? Every day the Archer plays. It's got people blowing people up kind of just mindlessly, and like there's no real consequences for it. So we're like surrounded and fascinated by death, but we're not having any honest conversations about real dying.
Yeah.
The fact that you and I are mortal.
It's because people are scared of it, right? If they don't address it, it won't happen. And then it does happen. And they're not prepared.
Yeah, what happens is when the conversation comes up is in a time of crisis, when people have to make tough choices about, as they say, pulling the plug is the kind of crass way to say it, but the kind of extending life or using technology and medicine, and we're just not having honest conversations about dying. And it's really important to talk about dying, because talking about dying can really help you focus on living in a certain way. So we're all just, like you said, we're just all trying to seek it, look for a thrill, or just distract ourselves. That's what I would say. We're just like massively trying to distract and entertain ourselves, so we don't actually have to look at each other and deal with real things.
Evil, suffering, and death.
There you go. You're right.
Is that something that you talk about? Like, end of
Yeah,
life.
Yeah, absolutely. And we even use a book now called, and I have a TEDx SMU talk on this.
It's on YouTube.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. It's called Dying to Live.
I'll put it in the description.
Okay, it's a TEDx talk. And anyway, I talk about that because to talk about, there used to be a whole conversation called Ars Moriendi, the art of dying.
That's Latin.
Greek. Yeah, no Latin. The whole art of dying. And it's about realizing you are mortal. And this gets back into Insight Timer app and the meditation that you do and all that, because part of the reason I think that we're not very good right now, at least a lot of us, I'll speak for myself. Okay, I'll speak for myself. Maybe a lot of people are at doing what they're constantly trying to get you to do, which is actually be aware of and grateful for and present to
life.
This moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This moment in life.
Instead of just distracting yourself to death. Pardon the pun? Yeah, just like it's like when you have a little kid or whatever and you're trying to talk to them, they're looking there and there and there and there all over the place. Okay. And you kind of take their chin and square it up to your face.
She's touching my chin right now.
Yeah, sorry. Take their chin and you like put your 2 fingers at your own eyes and like, look at me. Let's connect here.
Yeah.
You know,
let's have a moment.
Let's have a moment. Let's connect. Let's talk about what's real. Let's, live a life worth living. And by the way, I did work in hospice as a chaplain for a while. So I helped people die.
Was that during...
And I think I still help people die. When I'm helping people live, I'm helping them die.
Faster?
I know, it's terrible. My students are like, whoa, Dr. Death. I'm like, no, I don't mean it that way. So another funny thing that happened. So this is another thing I tell people, because you're going to die, and also the people you love are going to die, and the people you admire. So one way to live a more moral life, not that I've perfected it, but one thing I do is, instead of just listening to people rattle on about they believe this and they believe that, yada yada, I look around at people whose lives bear the kind of fruit that I want my life to bear.
Okay.
I look at the way that person lives in the world, the effect they have on the world and the people around them, and again, the way they promote the flourishing of everything around them. Like, okay, I see how that person lives. Now I want to ask them, what motivates you? Why do you do what you do? That's more important to me, because if you sit here and just tell me you believe this and this and this and this, and then you go off and you're a complete jerk, I don't actually care what you believe, because what you believe
isn't how you live.
Isn't helping anybody. So don't tell me what you believe. Let me follow you around and see what you do and how you act, and then I'll tell you actually what you believe. Show me your checkbook. Exactly. Show me your calendar. I'll tell you what you believe. So one thing I do is try to pick out people that I consider spiritual giants of some kind. They're not giants like the Dalai Lama. Not that it's bad. I'm talking about just regular people I know.
Everyday
that I could talk to. Yeah, exactly. And so it's funny, I was telling my students about, I was like, so William Sloane Coffin was one of them. He was the pastor at Riverside Baptist Church for a long time, really involved in the civil rights movement. He's written a number of books. He's the chaplain at Yale. Not when I was there. This is in the 60s. Anyway, he's may he rest in peace. And so what happened, I was like, so William Sloane Coffin. So I tell my students, whoever that person is, find those people and make sure to schedule time. Call them up, even if they're not personal friends. Call them up or find a way to talk to them. Don't wait too late. And ask them the questions you want to ask them. So I told them the story about talking to William Sloane Coffin 2 weeks before he died. Called him. So we shared an editor, and I was like, oh my gosh, I would give anything to talk to William Sloane Coffin. And my editor was like, you want to? I'll arrange a conversation. I'm like, what? So I got to talk to William Sloane Coffin, and I had made a list of questions to ask him because he lived a long time. So I'm like, okay, here's where I am. Here's my situation. Like, if you were me, what's some advice you could give? What are the books I should read? Whatever. I had a list of questions. And so I was telling my students I got to do that before he died. And then another spiritual giant for me, Bishop David Lawson, and I got to talk to him a couple months before he died. The same thing, and really deep, meaningful questions about what he's learned about life, etc. I'm sitting in the middle of telling these stories about make sure you talk to your spiritual giants. And all my students are hearing is like, no one should want to receive a phone call from you or be your spiritual giant because they die within 2 months after talking to you. I was like, wait, I'm not telling the story the right way. This is not coming across the way I'm trying to come across, because their eyes are just big and round. Like, do all your stories end with your spiritual giants dying? Very soon after talking to you? Are you the actual Grim Reaper? Like, no. So I know sometimes when I talk about this, I can sound a little bit too lighthearted or flip about it, and I'm not. But I worked in hospice. So hospice, of course, is where a service or a place. The one I worked at was the first one built in the United States to serve this function. So it's when you realize you're going to die and you stop active treatment. And the idea is to die with dignity, on your own terms, pain-free, and it's a beautiful movement.
It's not assisted
movement.
Suicide.
It's not assisted suicide.
It's just stop treatment.
It's letting life take its natural rest of its course, and you stay comfortable. And people get worried. They're like, "Oh my gosh, I don't want to get addicted to morphine." Like, well, you're dying, so it's not a problem. You have access, to this. So no, it's not just, grabbing some morphine. There's art therapy, there's there's people come and play music. It's actually a really beautiful, life-giving space, which sounds ironic. It sounds beautiful. It is. I mean, it's a challenging space too, because also not all family members are ready for the person to go. It's complicated, but anyway. So this is something I care very much about. And what I learned, what I saw a lot, is people tend to die the way people live.
Yeah, that makes sense though, right?
So if you live in a bitter, angry way,
you're gonna go out that way.
Yes. No, people can change, but I'm just saying. I go around a lot asking myself, when I'm on my deathbed, looking back, what do I want to think about this? What do I want my life to have been? What do I want my legacy to be? How do I want to be? And however that is, how do I start being that way now?
Exactly.
And not waiting till then. That's why I think it's very fruitful to ponder your mortality on a regular basis, not to be depressing or a downer or self-absorbed or afraid, but quite the opposite. To understand you get to choose.
Yeah.
Right? You get to choose how you're going to live. It doesn't stop whether you die or not. It just matters if you're going to live, live a better life, as we would say in the philosophical rut, right? What is the good life? What does it look like?
Yeah.
If you are somebody who doesn't cultivate relationships very well in your life, don't expect to be surrounded by a lot of people when you're dying. Live alone, die alone. Right? So anyway, I think all these subjects, they're not just about dying. At the end of the day, they're really only about living and what do you value. So we use a book actually called The Christian Art of Dying in that class. And it's really philosophical insofar as it really talks about virtues. Because that's contemplating the fact you're going to die helps. What is the meaning of life? Literally, it's why I was a philosophy major. Because I was walking around going, what is the meaning of life? Not even being funny. Like, that's my actual question. Like, why? Yeah, exactly. Why am I here? Why are we here? Like, why am I here with you?
Where are we going?
What's the point?
Yeah.
Why be moral?
Yeah. Great questions. Big questions.
Yeah, they're really big questions. What is truth? What is beauty? What is friendship? Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, they're very important questions. Why are we here? And maybe some people come up with the answer of there's no reason, it's all just random, it's chaos, whatever. There's lots of different answers have been given, but please at least ask the question.
Works for you, right?
Yeah. Well,
you don't want to really find the answer. You want to find your answers.
Yeah. Yes. Because are you saying the same one?
Why are we here? You don't want the definite answer for why everyone's here. You just need something that you believe in, that you have faith in. Why are we here?
Yeah, what's the meaning of life?
Or what's that?
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the same for everyone.
Right, and also I remember a professor telling my roommate one time when she was going through a really, really just existential
crisis.
Yeah. Which, you often do, college age. That's kind of what you're supposed to be figuring out. Is asking these questions, right?
Why am I here?
And her brother had gone through a terrible accident, actually, where his arm got to a wood chipper and lost his arm, and it's like, wow. And she's 18 were freshmen or sophomores, just 18 or 19 years old, and like the
Yeah.
brother almost,
Died.
yeah, now he's like gotten
No
arm,
arm.
and then changed obviously
His
not
outlook.
obviously, because that's the thing.
Well,
Depending
does it
on
have to change your outlook?
That's the thing, right? How do you handle tragedy, and can you actually kind of develop muscles, emotional muscles,
Yeah.
or philosophical muscles, spiritual muscles that can help you weather tragedy more successfully, however you want to define successfully, in ways that you come out the other side with some sense of joy and meaning and purpose, right? So she was just going through a really tough time, and she had her one professor who was really did not have any kind of sense of meaning, and
Wow.
I think it would kind of
The
bummed
professor
me out.
didn't.
The one professor she went to, I won't name the professor, but the professor had a lot go on in her life too, and she was basically like, just give it up, there is no meaning, just deal with
Jeez.
it. Yeah, to my friend who's like 19. Yeah. And
Pretty harsh.
but then another one of my professors who was important professor to me, had a big influence on me, one of my philosophy professors, he talked to her. I don't know, I'm just putting this out here, I'm not making this as a statement, I totally agree with her or not, but he talked to her about, because she's like, well, again, what's the meaning of life? And of course she had in mind a capital M meaning, right? Like, what is the meaning?
Oh, the meaning
of life? And his
the
answer to her was,
there is no
yeah,
meaning.
Well, he can't say if there is, but he's saying, I don't really ask the question that way. I ask more, what are the small m meanings of life? There doesn't have to be one giant M. For some people there might be.
Yeah.
But also it can be enough to have multiple little M's.
Yeah, that add up.
Right? So I don't know what I think about that. But it's always stuck with me. And because one thing I say to my students, actually quoting out of somebody else, but part of their job as ministers is to show up and help people see the meaning.
Yeah.
In the middle of the mess. And if they can't see any meaning, help people make meaning.
Yeah.
Because you can also actually make meaning. It's not always just about discovering meaning in something. You can actually make meaning.
Yeah. Go out there and do it.
You can construe reality in a way that is meaningful. You're not like a victim unless you let somebody else feed you a line.
Yeah.
Right? About reality. And tell you that something's natural, or this is how it is, whatever. And it may be, but you need to go do the hard work. I mean, that's what I've discovered. It's funny because some of the stuff, yes, I've changed my mind over the years on some things, but also some things have just been confirmed for me. Some things that I thought were true, I went out and tested and whatever, and it turns out I still think they're true.
Yeah.
But I think they're true in a different way. I think they're true now because I've also really thought through and had hard conversations with people who disagree with me.
Yeah.
Not because I think they're true, because I've spent my whole life putting my fingers in my ears, not listening to anybody who would say otherwise. That's a different kind of...
Best beliefs are the ones you have to defend, right?
Yeah, or at least test out. Yeah, defend.
You have to, if you actually believe in it and you can defend it.
Yeah.
You're not going to lose faith because someone
right.
opposes you.
Right. I don't think God, for instance, is afraid of truth. That people are like, you can't question God. I remember that when I was a philosophy major in this class on existentialism in college. And this person was getting really offended. We were reading actually Elie Wiesel. Do you know him? He's a Holocaust survivor. So Elie, E-L-I-E. You know, he wrote Night. He wrote the book Night.
Oh, yeah, I know.
And he also wrote Dawn, but Night is a book everyone on this planet needs to read.
In Texas, at least.
It's wow, that's intense for high school. It's intense for anybody at any age. But anyway, he wrote a book called Night, and he also wrote a book called The Trial of God.
Okay.
Right, and so basically, God was put on trial for the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And I was in a classroom of people who were of a very conservative Christian bent, and they were just like offended by the whole project. Like, you cannot question God. It's wrong, you know. And I was like, wow, I'm in a really different kind of universe of Christianity, because who wants to worship a God you can't question? Who wants to worship a tyrant? Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I'm a God-fearing person. I would consider myself a God-fearing person.
Fear God?
Well, fear, if you mean by the word fear, you mean respect.
No, I mean
Oh,
fear.
oh yeah, no, fear cripples everybody. Fear is not helpful. I mean, it's prevalent, but it's not helpful. So yeah, it was just a moment for me. I'll never forget it. I can actually picture the whole classroom. I can picture the blonde-headed lady sitting across from me who's just like, this whole project is just wrong. We shouldn't even be having this conversation, which she was completely free to believe. But I was very clear, and I didn't grow up Christian. So, I mean, this was, I came at the faith through philosophy. I mean, I'd gone to church and I had some important people here and there. I mean, I went to various churches here and there with friends, whatever. I didn't grow up in the church. So I really came to all this through philosophy, because philosophy was the first time I met intellectual Christians who were not scared of asking any and every question and following every logical implication, no matter where it led.
Yeah.
And being willing to say, this is where it leads.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
So can your faith actually encompass this or not? And if it can't, it's too small. For me anyway. So, then I got clear about what kind of community I would be able to fit into and what kind of community I would not be able to fit into, would not be good for me, and it wouldn't be good for the other people.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I just can't imagine that, living that way, where I don't question God. Yeah, and also I can't imagine God being any, less, how boring for God. For you to just go through your life like an automaton, exactly, and never question. How would you not question? And why do you have a brain? I mean, Romans 12:2, it says, the Apostle Paul writes to the people in Rome. He says, "Be transformed by the renewing of your minds."
Okay.
Okay. So, put on your thinking cap.
Yeah. Your
thinking cap is not the enemy of God.
Yeah,
do not check your brain at the door.
Reinforce your faith by questioning.
Yeah, absolutely. Why not? This is why I love studying the Bible with Jews. Oh my gosh.
Jews for Jesus.
Jews for Jesus? No, Jews.
Yeah.
Regular. Oh, sorry.
You're fine.
Yeah, sorry. No, and so that's another thing my students do. We study texts and watch, and we get trained in Jewish ways of studying scripture, and they have so much fun, and it's loud, and it's disagreement, and they don't mind. They're like, Rabbi so and so says this, and Rabbi so and so says that, and they're not trying to solve it or get to the meaning. The meaning is the act of getting together in community and hashing these things out and being fascinated by life and love and death and hate. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure to talk to you and kind of hear about your life and your experiences.
Well, thanks. It's been fun. I didn't want to end on the note of hate. I just ended and hate. So let's end on the note of love.
Okay. Any place you want to direct people if they want to learn more?
They could go to my website, jamieclarksouls.com.
I'll link that in the description.
Yeah, I have resources there, and it's a way to contact me if you're interested in conversation or further resources on other topics. So yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, it's great. I love the show.
All right. Thank you.